Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Cinema Savvy. It is myself, George. Delighted to be joined by Sam and Craig from the James Bond Again podcast, which is going to be interesting that we've got a James Bond guest on for the non-spy film, which is like the ultimate exception in a very polite way, I'm going to say, which was unintentional, but at the same time very interesting. So I've butchered that intro. It's absolutely freezing. We're recording this in January. There's been a time jump from the week to weeks. How are we both doing tonight? All doing tonight, sorry, I should say.
Very good, very good. I mean, cold. It's been freezing, but it's lovely to be back. I'm actually doing this the night before I go back to work, so this feels like a nice kind of entry point before I start work tomorrow. But no, aside from that, very good, thank you.
I'm doing all right. Thanks for having me, George. First day back at work today. That was a bit of a brutal feeling to wake up this morning. So it's nice to bookend the day with something a bit nicer.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. I was back today. I did do a couple of days over Christmas, 2 in a row, but I very strategically booked some annual leave in 2026 to get myself a little more of a break. So it's been very nice. I hope everybody at home has had a lovely new year. They had nice Christmases. It's been incredibly busy. I've lost count of the days. We're pre-recording this as we have with all the others. But I'm going to make this a big thing. We're pre-recording this 8 days before the episode comes out, which might sound like a non-entry. But if anyone's curious, we'd batch recorded the first 7 episodes in 3 weeks, I think from mid-November to the start of December. So I had terrible facial hair from November across December. So it's been very jarring, but I'm excited to be back to be talking Pixar, talking Ratatouille, released in 2007, directed by Brad Bird. But before we get into that, Craig, I have a question for you. So this is the first time we've had you on this retrospective series, and where I'm kind of going with this, and I'm going down a pipeline where almost everyone's had interesting responses. But what is your earliest memories with Pixar?
My earliest memories with Pixar. Well, I'm old enough to remember when Toy Story came out, so it would have been Toy Story, and I remember at the time everyone was going wild about this new, format, this new technology, this new way of animating things. But it was just lost on me because I think I was 5 years old. And so I watched it and didn't really understand what all the fuss was about because, it wasn't as enchanting for me. I couldn't really appreciate, what a sort of technological step up it was. I was still that age where my video collection of Disney films, would span films that were made in the 40s and films that were made in the 90s. And I wouldn't really be able to appreciate the difference in, age or animation style between them. But yeah, it was literally Toy Story.
Amazing. I think that seems to be not almost everyone's, but I like the fact that whether we're a little bit younger, which we may be, I won't pinpoint ages. Mine was Toy Story, but I wasn't born when it came out, and only until Cars last week I think we've had the first person to not say Toy Story, or maybe Monsters Inc., which is interesting because that person's only a couple of years younger than me. So I love hearing people's backgrounds with it because it is a newish studio. I have to say now it's 2026. The studio has just started celebrating its 40th anniversary as a studio, but its first film came out just over 30 years ago, which was Toy Story. So there's a lot of behind the scenes. And without me being that guy, you can check out the first episode if you want a bit of background on Pixar. Obviously, it took them 9 years to make a film, and the Pixar technology itself sat within Lucasfilm with George Lucas for many years. So I say 40-year anniversary with a giant asterisk because I don't think it's really intentional. Whereas something like Lucasfilm, where it's like, I've made a studio to go and make a film next year, that's more understandable. Like, I want to put it into that. Different conversation. I almost segued into an even worse conversation. I watched Forrest Gump for the first time this weekend.
What? The first time?
I'd seen so many clips. I just had never really been interested. And I'll be really open. When I was at school, I definitely would have been too immature to watch that properly. So I very politely held off for many years. And it's never appealed to me as an adult either. So I've always been in that zone. And there's just a lot of times Tom Hanks would shout, and it just sounded exactly like Woody. I know it's obviously the same actor. But there was just some moments where I was like, no, this isn't Tom Hanks shouting. This is Woody now. But I did like it. I'll say that. I liked it. Not liked it as much as a lot of people, but it was fine. and ticking some 90s films. But we're not here to talk about the 90s. We're here to talk about the year 2007 and what a wild time of the world this was. I just turned 12. Transformers was out at cinemas this year. I'd started secondary school. We're hitting that point where I'm remembering the years and when these films came out. And where we'll kickstart with this is our memories of Ratatouille. And I don't mind telling you both this. I don't really have memories of Ratatouille. This wasn't a first time watch. I went to, oh God, I want to say I maybe saw this in 2008. A friend of mine who lives 2 doors away, you know, when you're younger, right, you just go hang out with your friends, your neighbors, like the good old days.
Mm-hmm.
We're knocking on the door to like hang out for a bit. And then, oh yeah, watch the film, come upstairs. It was about halfway through, and I just remember like it's a film about a rat cooking. And I was like, oh, okay. I wasn't sat there bored, but obviously I hadn't gone to see my friends to watch Ratatouille. And I enjoyed it by the end of it, but I couldn't tell you much. I know that meme culture is big with this film. I know that I want to say the generation below were very big on this film. Like Ratatouille's got a huge audience. And it's kind of made me excited to go back to it this week when we're doing the series. This is one of the ones that jumped out. Like, I know I've only really seen it once and I was younger. And I think this might be one of the ones I enjoy a lot more on a rewatch, especially in chronological order. So I don't have memories as such. I had no idea about the voice casts. I don't even think I knew it was Patton Oswalt till a couple of months ago when someone mentioned it. It might have been you, Sam. I think you might have mentioned it to me or someone else might have. But yeah, I don't have any memories of this, which is nice. So I'm going to hand over to Craig for what your history of Ratatouille is.
I think I first saw Ratatouille probably 2008 as well. I definitely didn't see it in the cinema. I don't think I'd seen a Pixar film in the cinema since Finding Nemo. So what, 2003? And the next one I would have seen would have been WALL-E in 2008. And I remember I only saw it because, and we were just discussing this a little bit off mic before, George, I was probably in that age where you kind of stop watching animation for a while. But I had a friend who was really into animation, and that whole generation of like early internet animation that completely passed me by because I didn't have a computer at the time. But I had a friend who, you know, had a computer and, you know, would keep up with animation, all that kind of stuff. And he strongly recommended that we watch Ratatouille at his house because the animation was so good in his opinion. And I really appreciate that it was he who recommended it to me, because I don't think I would have watched it so kind of attentively were it not for his enthusiasm about it in particular. Because, you know, at the end of the film, I did say to myself, like, I don't know if we're allowed to swear on this. So I won't swear.
You can, it's fine.
I said, well, I said, yeah, fair fucks, that was really good. And, you know, I really, really enjoyed it. But partly because I had him sat next to me geeking out about it, and I was like, yeah, you know what, like actually this is a pretty good film. So until rewatching it recently, I'd maybe only seen it one other time. I think probably when I first got Disney Plus, when that came out and there's quite a limited selection on there, it was one of the ones that I rewatched. But I always had fond memories of it for that reason and for that experience. It did stand out to me as you know, one of the pretty good Pixar films in a period in which not all of them landed the same way with me. I was not a fan of WALL-E at all, for example.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't watch it for the first time until a couple of months ago, which is the thing. So it was because of this series that I was like, I need to watch more Pixar, because I realized my my view of Pixar was very limited, and which was really just consolidated to 6 or 7 films within the first 15 years of you know, Pixar really going. So yeah, this was one of the ones I was kind of trying to work it out in my head, you know, because I was turning 12 years old before Ratatouille came out. I was just not really interested in anything kind of new. I think at that point, I think I was very much about pre-established franchises. Star Wars had ended for me at that point. It was like, you know, that's gone. I'd just gotten into James Bond quite heavily. And I was looking at other films that came out during the time, Pirates of the Caribbean, at World's End, Order of the Phoenix, Spider-Man 3, Shrek the Third, Simpsons movie. It was all kind of sequels or kind of parts of established franchises that were out, and I saw all of those in the cinema, but I didn't watch Ratatouille. I think the last Pixar film I saw in the cinema was The Incredibles. So Cars just kind of, went by, which sounds really funny in isolation to say Cars went by. But that's just how it was. And I don't really know why that was the case. I don't know whether it was just kind of an age thing, kind of, okay, you go to high school, you'll link yourself with these things that you've kind of grown up with. But I didn't look at Pixar as its own kind of thing and think, oh, this is the new Pixar that I need to watch. I think it was just kind of like, oh, this is a film about a rat cooking, and I just don't care. I think probably would have been my thing, because I remember the promo for it. I remember seeing it advertised, and I don't remember ever saying I want to watch that film. So it does feel like my childhood kind of going there. And I do also think, if I'm thinking 2007, I definitely had started watching things like Happy Tree Friends on the computer and Family Guy, and which is probably definitely too young to be starting watching those things, but it was kind of a case of my kind of look at animation was not just family friendly fun with a heartfelt story within it. It's kind of, I wanted more humor and kind of more wildness, which this wasn't going to do. So I kind of find it quite interesting, but I was doing the same thing with Disney. I wasn't watching any new Disney films by that point. I don't think I'd seen a new Disney film for about 2 or 3 years. So it's weird, because I look back now and I'm like, 11, 12 years old is so young. Like, you really should have gravitated towards this. And maybe it is a generational thing. As you've said, we had a handful of films there that we're really into, and then it's just kind of like, oh, I'm just not that interested. I've got my Toy Story and my Monsters Inc. and my Finding Nemo. I don't need anything else.
I find it fascinating. Like, it's kind of important to chat with the three of us speaking about it, but there is an age we go through, and Pixar's fascinating. That I don't want to compare it to, is it Laika? And I'm not that familiar with the films. I don't know if I've seen any bar 1 or 2 of them. When you follow like an inception of a studio, which isn't really a thing, but we're looking back with a relatively modern animation studio thinking, oh my God, look at all these films that we grew up with that were that everyone talks about, that now have a huge history decades later. And I find it fascinating that, yeah, when we are at school, it used to sound like Star Wars ended to me, which was like the closed door, like, what do you replace Star Wars with? Those Doctor Who at the time, the Tennant era, and Eccleston. The Spider-Man films, I really watched 3, which is 2007 as well. Harry Potter was obviously ongoing. It was on film 5. The last book was coming out at that point in time. And animation just is, I don't know if it's do I get really intensive society? Like, not society, but like school years when, oh, you're watching football now. Oh, you're playing this now. You're on your PlayStation. You're getting into the gaming era and things like that. And I'm pretty sure I didn't see an animated film at the cinema from Finding Nemo in 2003 to Toy Story 3 in 2010. I am dead sir. I don't think I saw a single Walt Disney animated film. I probably haven't even seen. I know Chicken Little was one of them. I'd seen Cars at a friend's. I'd seen Ratatouille at a friend's. I didn't see like Up and a few others that in between this and Toy Story. Wait until I was like studying at college when everyone was saying, "Oh my God, Pixar's so great. Have you seen this?" And I'm like, "Oh, Pixar." And then you start watching it, and you just sat there crying, like, "Wow, like these aren't really for children, are they?" But they sort of are, but they aren't. And I find it fascinating because what sort of threw me with Ratatouille, even rewatching it this week, I was surprised at how much I enjoyed it. Now, I do have a weird story. I've been to Disneyland Paris twice before. Each was for one day, and each time we didn't go to the park. We went to, I believe this is now gone, I found out recently, the studio section, which was more about like behind the scenes, like the production side of making things. And we went in 2008, I think March, April time during a half term. So I'm still quite young, I can't remember a lot, but we were in Paris for a family few days. So we did one day at Disney. And I think we ate at a Ratatouille restaurant. And I hadn't seen the film. And I texted a friend, Charlie, who's a good friend of the channel. I texted Reese, I'm like, is there still a Ratatouille restaurant? Was I imagined this, like, when we were younger? Because obviously it's in Paris as well. And apparently Ratatouille has been all over Disneyland Paris, which kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
But the Disney Studios is now gone, which I was really surprised. I remember really enjoying it. And the reason we went is that my oldest sister was just starting or about to start a college course on like art or something. So it was like more of like a, not going to be the next Walt Disney, but go look at some behind the scenes stuff. And I was sat like, I want to go to the theme
Talk
park.
about it, but you
like,
never know what she could have been, George. Be supportive.
She's fine. I'm very wow. Speaking of being supportive, she's got baby on the way. And there have already been conversations about Disneyland in a couple of years. And I've sat there, not only very smug, but I've also sat there like, wow, Universal Studios is coming here, isn't it? And I know that's 5 years away, supposedly. But that's all happening. Different side point about theme parks. I don't know my theme parks, but Disneyland Studios in Paris is going to be replaced by the Lion King, which went down very well with my siblings when I told them both. And a Frozen Land, which none of us care about. But I'm imagining for children, especially what will be like young girls, that's going to be like, what Toy Story Land would be for me, or Star Wars Galaxy's Edge would be for me, isn't it?
Yeah.
But yeah, sorry to digress. I just find it fascinating, especially we're all similar ages, if I'm allowed to say that. Like, I think there's a maximum of probably 6 years between us all, a very, very random guess. But I just find it fascinating. Everyone's had these moments, especially in the teen years at secondary school, where not that it was avoiding getting bullied, but I remember my older sister setting me down on day one of secondary school, being like, listen, if you tell them all you're obsessed with Star Wars, you get bullied, drop it. If you tell them you play Warhammer, you get bullied, don't do it. And it's like, you sat there like, oh, this is intense, because we were from a very small primary school, and it was the best advice I ever had. I played secondary school like a fiddle.
Well,
and
this is the thing, actually, when you say about school and stuff, and I do think, I know it's a real side point, but I do think there is kind of like the pressures when you do that. It's like, what do you say and what do you not say? Like I was still watching The Story of Tracy Beaker before I went to school, and I was like, I can't tell the people at this all-boys high school that I'm watching this show. And, within a year of this film coming out, for example, I went to the cinema to watch Meet the Spartans with people, and that's the kind of film I know. But that's the kind of we're going to talk about this and do this. And we're going to talk about Family Guy in the corridors and stuff. It wasn't we're interested in film and we're going to talk about this. You may have like one or two friends who may have been courageous to speak about it, but it did feel actually like you couldn't really be as open about kind of your love for that kind of thing unless it was something that was in general very, very popular, which I think for our age group, this just wasn't it.
Yeah, agreed. Toy Story 3 was different. I think everyone generationally went to that from school, but you are right. And those things, they probably still exist. I don't know not to sound like an old person, I don't know what the kids of today have as that, but there are certainly things. I mean, I was very lucky. I got into football in year 7. So I was very much the guy obsessed with football for 5 years. I'm like, great, because no one needs to know about the other stuff I like. And then they sort of slowly started figuring it all out in year 11. At that point, it was too late. I was already going to college to do film. So it is interesting. And I do feel that that's historically there. But sorry to, it's a fascinating discussion. And it is part of this, especially when we're looking at these like late noughties films, particularly pre-Toy Story 3. Because as I said, when it gets to Wall-E and up, I've got nothing. It'll be like, I just watched them when at college because I was catching up. Literally, that was the reason why I saw them. But talking Ratatouille properly, the IMDb plot synopsis, which is sweet and short this week. A rat who can cook makes an unusual alliance with a young kitchen worker at a famous Paris restaurant. And it is very much worth noting that this is the second Pixar film. Well, not second Pixar film not to be set in America, but the first, I guess you could say, Pixar film set on Earth, not set in America, that isn't Finding Nemo in Sydney. But let's get into some behind the scenes. So this came as a surprise to me, and this is something I love doing with the series. I don't know about the concepts for these films' ideas. I think it was the first episode or second episode. It might have been the second episode we did Bugs Life, Sam, when there's basically a very famous lunch sometime at Pixar where, and I refuse to believe this is real, but I kind of wish it is. At someone on a lunch break, they all had a meal together, and apparently on that lunch break on that one day, they came up with the ideas for what was it? Was it like Bugs Life, Monsters Inc., Finding Nemo? Basically 4 or 5 films that were mega.
I
Wally
think
was
like
one of them.
Wally might have been in them as well. Like
Yeah.
it was crazy.
All on the same lunch break. And I'm like, I don't know what was in your food that day. I don't know what the other lunch breaks have been, or if they just never had a lunch break together since. But it's been really fun, like seeing how these concepts came to be. And this one came from somebody I'm unfamiliar with, Jan Pinkava, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. It's not the Dutch for Jan, I already checked. He came up with a concept of Ratatouille in 2000. And it basically just got stuck in, not development hell, but obviously Pixar are doing at this point in time Monsters Inc. They're doing Finding Nemo, basically all the films of that lunch break from 1995 or whatever year it was. So there's a list to get through. And Pixar would pick this up again in 2004. Bob Peterson joins as a co-director, so I'm also unfamiliar with. And the reason I am unfamiliar with both of these is that they would both leave in 2005. Jan would keep a story credit, which is very, very fair. It's his concept, but Brad Bird took over, given the incredible success of that was definitely not a pun intended. Sorry, given the success of The Incredibles, I understand why Pixar wanted him on another film. They were struggling with the ideas how to turn the concept into reality, and on comes Brad Bird, who apparently loved the story idea, the concept, and wanted to be involved, which, if I'm allowed to say it, following the Incredibles review, I'm a big fan of Brad Bird, not because of the Incredibles, but I love it when, as I've got a bit older and you can appreciate it more, directors go from animation to live action. That's quite a difficult jump. Very few can do it. And I think Brad Bird has done some phenomenal live action films. Tomorrowland, I don't think it's his fault. I think that's more Disney, if I'm allowed to get into that. I saw it once, I won't be seeing it again, don't worry. But the fact he goes and does, I think, the second or third best Mission Impossible film, which kind of, I've always said, is like an animated film. Like, if anyone ever watches Rogue Nation, there's some weird moments where, oh god, not AI, because someone would do it, but you could watch that Mission Impossible film and it would actually function as a Pixar film. And the bit I always go to is when Simon Pegg's looking down the invisible corridor, when it's like a camera of his face and they keep projecting Simon Pegg. He looks like a Pixar human in that moment. And the image has never shook my head, but yes, sorry to be waffling. Your thoughts on Brad Bird, both of you. Sorry, I should jump in with that really.
Well, I know mostly from Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol, which really rekindled my love for that franchise. Yeah. It's probably not one of my favorite Mission Impossible films, but I as a kid I really loved Mission Impossible 2, and that was my route into the franchise, if you like. I'm still probably a bit of a Mission Impossible 2 apologist. Sam will know from our conversations on Bond again that I'm often a bit of an apologist for what are widely considered to be the worst entries in a popular franchise.
Same here.
World weary nod from Sam there. But from there I went back to the first Mission Impossible as a youngster, found it a bit incomprehensible, but I liked the action. Mission Impossible 3 was just like a completely different film altogether, and I didn't gel with it at the time at all. And so when Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol came out, it had a really animated, in the other sense of the word, sort of quality to it, right? It was very sort of kinetic, it was playful, it had a sort of a joy about it, sort of jovial quality that obviously later I could appreciate probably came from Brad Bird's experience in animation. And I think in that series in particular, which has a kind of secret sauce that they've stumbled upon later in the series, really beginning with Ghost Protocol. And so I think it not only sort of fundamentally rebooted that series, but also gave it an identity that is now characteristic of the way that people think of Mission Impossible films in general. And I don't think that would have happened had it not been for Brad Bird.
It's like their Goldfinger. That's what I've always said, that once
Yeah.
Protocol came out, they're like, right, okay, there's Tom Cruise on a landmark doing this insane thing. Because I'd never seen... Ghost Protocol was my first Mission Impossible film. And I remember the behind-the-scenes photo way before the film ever come out. It was just Tom Cruise sat on the top of Burj Khalifa. And I was like, oh, okay, it's cool. At that point in time, Tom Cruise isn't the madman, that he is today of these wild stunts. He's obviously doing them, but as you know, I'm not aware of it. And I remember watching that film and really enjoying it. And I find it just very interesting with Brad Bird. And I think that film franchise and what he did for it, there's an image in my head of Tom Cruise watching Ratatouille at the cinema. And don't know how, don't know why or even when, that, he does The Incredibles, Ratatouille, then he does Mission Impossible. And we know Tom Cruise is the producer. Tom Cruise would have very specifically picked him for that. And I also love about Ghost Protocol is the film where everything goes wrong. It's like my favorite niche subgenre that's not a genre, where films where everything goes wrong for every character and what follows with it is remarkable. But I think Brad Bird clearly had the potential with stuff like Iron Giant, with The Incredibles, with Ratatouille. How do you make a film about a talking rat? Well, a rat that can cook work. But he does. He gets that concept. Sorry, Sam, I jumped in before you could talk, so.
No, I mean, I do not have that much more to say. I mean, I didn't even know that he did the Iron Giant, to be honest. It was like, I think that was a lot of people, again, our age, have fond memories of the Iron Giant. I was kind of indifferent to it. I always felt a bit weird about it, and I don't know why. I think I'll probably do a rewatch of that, to be honest. But I love The Incredibles. I think it was such a good film, and it was like the perfect time for that to happen when there were superhero movies about, but we weren't being absolutely, drowned in them, as we would be literally less than 10 years later. So, I think he already had quite a good base, that would, give him good consideration for Ratatouille, which is a complete shift from The Incredibles in terms of kind of style, but I think it's that sense of kind of, really caring for the characters and just having a strong sense of, kind of right and wrong and stuff, which you can still see in here. I have to say about Ghost Protocol really quickly, it's the only Mission Impossible film that I've seen, and I saw it in the cinema in New York, which was crazy because literally days later, The Phantom Menace in 3D came out, and I really wish that I'd been in New York days later so I could have experienced watching The Phantom Menace in a cinema off of Times Square. I feel like it just would have been amazing. However, out of the two options that were presented, I was like, I would go with the Ghost Protocol lot. And I really enjoyed it, but because I don't have a good sense of what came before and what came after, it's this weird kind of isolated vision of this film. But based on clips and things I've seen, and trailers, of course, of Mission Impossible films after this, I can so totally see, that film kind of being the spark that caused, okay, we need to shift how we're going to do a film, or how we present these films to audiences, because it was such a thrill, the entire time. I don't know why I never decided, oh, well, that was so good, I'm going to go back. I think I was just so into James Bond. I was like, anything that was even remotely like it. I mean, I wasn't watching the Bourne series or anything like that. I was like, no, I can't do it. Whereas now I'd probably be more open to it. So it's just really, interesting that Brad Bird went from those 3 animations to Ghost Protocol, and that his kind of, directorial era has not exactly been too full. I'm looking now, and it was like one every 3 or 4 years, and then the space between Incredibles 2 and Ray Gun, which really makes me laugh, is 8 years spaced apart. So I don't really know what that's about, or if that's just a decision. I don't know, but
I was excited for his new film. It's not out yet, but when you see it says it's an original film by Netflix, you're like, and that's all I'm going to say. Like, it's like director who doesn't get much work. Who we know he's going to do Incredibles 3, and Incredibles 2 was a huge success, but if I'm allowed to say this in a non-horrible way, they're more successes because of the brand that they are, that everyone would obviously go to watch the sequel given the 15-year success. And it's kind of like, I remember watching Tomorrowland again because I'd never been to Disney properly, like as a park. I got no logic of the ride, but Tomorrowland the film was set in Tomorrowland for about 10 minutes at the end, and it was just really disappointing. And I think it's one of them films where, a director, I'm not saying he throws their career away, but he sort of sat there like, oh wow, like you've done Ratatouille, Incredibles, this goes Mission Impossible, and then it was like Tomorrowland came out, and I still won't forgive this. Tomorrowland bombed so bad they said, right, Tron 3's gone, nothing to do with Tomorrowland, but Tron, the original Tron 3, I've got to say, was sacrificed, and that gave us Jared Leto. Thank you, Disney. Different conversation though. No sign of Jared Leto in Pixar yet. Let's hope not, because that studio won't survive if they get him in one. But with some behind the scenes, with Brad Bird taking over, he did want to get involved in the story. And one of the big changes that they focused on him making was that Gusto was going to be like one of the lead characters. He was, I'm going to assume, without knowing, speculatory wise, Linguini would have probably just not been a character and Gusto be a character who finds the rat maybe, but he decided to have him killed off to change the story, to take Remy out of the sewers and have him be more. Apparently, the original concept was for it to be the rats living in the sewers underneath of France and then going up to do the cooking, which sounds like if, oh God. Do you remember at school you'd get like, not nursery rhymes, but is it the elf and the shoemaker?
I was about to say the elves and the shoemaker, where the shoemaker would go to bed and then the elves would come in at night, make the shoes, leave them there, and then the shoemaker. It's one of like my like favorite like little stories as a kid that I have a book of somewhere, and I can kind of see how that concept, where it's maybe, Remy is hearing of the woes of Gusto, and then like, I'm going to make this better for you and have like all these recipes and bits of food pre-made ready for him and his like workforce use. I can see that, but I think it was probably in the story's best interest to make the decision to kill him and have him more as a just someone to aspire to be, and inspiration for Remy. And I think it makes for a great character in Linguini.
See, I don't know. I wonder if having Gusto around, but as a kind of more of a benevolent figure, could have been interesting. We'll get into it, but I found the character of Skinner and his kind of storyline unpersuasive. Put it like that. I mean, it says a lot for Brad Bird that I'm watching a film about a cooking rat who controls a human by tugging on his hair, that it's only sort of 2/3 into the film when the hierarchy of the kitchen gets reorganized, that I'm sat there thinking, well, that'd never happen. So it took that long. The suspension of disbelief was real all that way. But I do wonder what it might have been like. I mean, I think it would change the story fundamentally, but I'm not necessarily wedded to the idea of Gusto being dead. But I see why they did it.
Yeah, I guess it depends what else. I mean, it's always fascinating behind the scenes because you don't get a lot of it with Pixar, especially the early days, because everything was so hunky-dory and this and that and lovely. And particularly with this one, it's, the concept wasn't working. You're trying to research, like, well, what was the third concept? And there's very few things out there other than Gusto was going to be alive, which kind of makes sense when you look at the opening and the sun angle I liked. And I guess it depends what they would have done with the Gusto, right? Like if he was, Pixar would have gone two routes, and this is just me assuming, this isn't any knowledge. Route one, he was actually a horrible, evil chef the whole time, bit like the Monsters Inc. villain. Or route two, he's this lovely old guy that's at a struggling restaurant who everyone wants to be better. And you can imagine Pixar doing one of those two. So it is interesting that Brad Bird switched up the story. An interesting one, which doesn't happen much these days. This was meant to originally come out in 2006, and Disney had this moved forwards a year to come out in 2007, move forward, delay it a year.
Back.
Not because it had any production. Yeah, move back. It's always weird with dates, it throws me. not because of any production issues. Production was absolutely smooth once Brad Bird came on board. Disney just wanted to prioritize the release of Cars, which is understandable to the logic of one film a year. Fair enough. Is it better? No. They were both successful. Yeah, I get it.
I feel like
and
it's the safer option out of the two.
And it's John Lasseter, so he's literally like, I run this studio, I'm having the release date. Well, he doesn't run it anymore, but it was one of them where it was interesting because Pixar, I mean, they would normally do one film. It's great they had so many in production, but considering we're talking about, we replaced directors and concept people with this, I didn't mention as well, Bob Peterson, he left Totally Sensible, he left to focus on Up, which no one's going to fault prioritizing that. Again, this is what a great functioning studio does. But moving away from behind the scenes, let's talk a little bit of animation, because this is the section that gets a little bit shorter each week. But this time we get to talk about the animation of rats. Now, I don't know about you both. I don't have a phobia of rats, but when I've seen them on the tube at like 5 a.m, it creeps me out a little bit. Like, that's when you know you're there early. It's when the rats are just chilling in the I don't know what you call it, the hallway, the station, I don't know. But Pixar kept a whole load of rats at the studio for a year, so that the animators could keep going to have a look at how the rats move and ideas to animate them. I'm just going to say that's probably the correct approach to wanting to animate rats. Unlucky to any animators with a phobia of rats. That would have probably been a very difficult time for them. Going to the office every day, just seeing rats in a hallway, probably in cages, scurrying around. Someone's job to probably feed them, keep them occupied. Your thoughts on that? To me, it's pretty gross, but it's very interesting, and I actually respect it.
I'm not sure. Like, I've known people who have pet rats, and they're very clean animals if you keep them as pets, and they're very intelligent. So I don't know, maybe it's, people have workplaces where they bring puppies in and things like that nowadays. So maybe it had a sort of dual function of, being like the class hamster, whereby people could sort of go over on their break and play with the rats. I mean, sure, if you had a phobia of rats, that's going to be quite distressing to be confronted with it day in, day out. So yeah, probably a bit of an occupational hazard there. But on the other hand, I think that, as far as the film's concerned, it was probably a really good idea to get a sense of, I suppose, the behavior of rats and, the way that they're going to move, and also probably good for like spurring the imagination, right? Like, usually when you keep rodents, you might have toys for them to play with. You get a sense of what it looks like when they're curious. Maybe you can let your imagination wander and think about situations you might like to conjure up for them.
Yeah, I mean, I remember seeing behind the scenes of like The Lion King, like years and years ago, where I think they got like artists who kind of like see a lion and just take sketches and draw how it was, and that's what I immediately think of when I hear that, aside from the fact that I would be petrified of having a rat about. But I think when my first, experience of rats was probably kind of the Rat King and rats in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, where it's like, these are evil vermin and all that. Then you kind of go, okay. But I think what is interesting in terms of the kind of the evolution of these films is that, whilst there has been a focus on animals and stuff in some cases, so we've had, A Bug's Life, and we've had kind of, the odd dog in some places, Cars, Toy Story, Incredibles is not that much. Finding Nemo is probably, the first big one where maybe you want to kind of look at how some fish move, but I think in this case it's even more important because it's animals interacting with a human environment way more than in Finding Nemo. So I think it's really important to kind of for them as a studio to kind of go, well, we need to kind of make sure that whilst this is animated cleanly and done in a way that's going to be visually impressive and, you know, actually entertaining for viewers, we do want it to come from a source of truth, and we do want to kind of do as much as we can to find the right balance between this is a realistic interpretation and this is also animation, and we're going to kind of, you know, do what we need to do in order to make this work. So I think anytime that you are kind of looking at trying to capture something based on reality, if you can see it in front of you and see how something moves, that's only going to help you in terms of how you're going to put that into your own story. So whilst I don't envy them for having to have rats about, unless they really love them, and I do think maybe I just have too many misconceptions of rats. And also I lived in an apartment complex. Well, when I first did videos for Cinema Savvy, when I would go down to the dumpsters towards the end of my time there, and rats did start to appear, and I was like, absolutely not. I'm so glad I'm leaving. Not great when you come home from a night out and you just see a massive rat scurrying along. Not fun. But yeah, I think I don't really, the concept of this film is fun. I don't love the idea personally I don't like the thought at all, actually, of rats cooking my food. But as an animated film, it's nice, and Remy is lovely.
I love the idea in this film as well. Like, whilst talking animation, the ultimate purpose is the phrase "anyone can cook," and it might be a bit cheesy or a bit cringy or however people want to interpret that. But I like the fact that in the canon in this world, Gustav, that's his logic. So of course, eventually, you play with the rat there. Anyone can cook, and I'll discuss it a little bit later. But I actually really loved the ending, which I don't know how people will be with that ending, but I really, really appreciate that, with a bit of common sense approach as well as in story. But it's a genius concept, because what is the one creature that no one would want to cook the food, as you just said, Sam? I was reading that Disney had tried to get some promotional deals with food companies. No one would touch Ratatouille because they didn't want to put a rat on their labels for their food.
Wow, no way.
I find fascinating.
Yeah.
Not to take them, you know, I know we get BB-8 oranges, but I get the rat. Like, is that a marketing department through and through? Is that like a business? I just thought that was very interesting. I wanted to find out to bring it up. I'm glad I've just done it now, because it kind of makes a bit of sense. But ultimately, this isn't a live action film. You know, it's a clear animated film about a rat cooking food. Like, you could maybe put another character on the front if you didn't want to. But I just think it's really interesting that clearly the industry had an eye out on this, and something that was apparently very difficult to do with this film as well. Food was supposedly very difficult to animate. I'm not going to sound like a conspiracy theorist. When the animators are struggling to animate food and get themselves a week in Paris visiting all the top restaurants in Paris to see what the food is presented as,
oh no,
that does very much feel like business expenses. Let's go away for a week. I'm sure it was a bit trickier than that. I'm sure food is difficult to animate, but I'm also somewhat, maybe I look like a dick, a bit like, is it really the company that can animate Monsters Fur, right? You're going to say a soup is a bit more difficult to animate, then I don't know. What's the most, again, I just keep thinking of Monsters Inc. that, we did 1 million pieces of fur on Sully's costume. Finding Nemo, all the things going there. Was food really more difficult than the swarm of the fish pointing in the arrows in different directions? Not for me to be controversial about, but listen.
I mean, maybe it's that we have a contextual familiarity with food that we don't have with the Great Barrier Reef. Like, the Great Barrier Reef exists in our minds a little bit, and so as long as it matches what we imagine it to be, then maybe that's good enough. Whereas food, I mean, I'm not around proper gastronomy day in, day out, believe me, but if something looks really good to eat, we have a sort of sense of how different types of food look, what their textures might be, what a really fresh looking tomato looks like. So I don't know, maybe I'm being too generous. Maybe they did just want to get the expense account out, but maybe there's a case to say that the most familiar things to us are the hardest to make look, persuasive on screen, precisely because they're so familiar to us. Whereas some of the sort of fantastical elements, sort of exist in the space of imagination a bit more. I don't know. I'm personally also quite persuaded that it could have just been a ruse to get to go to Paris.
Same. Probably. I mean, I do think there's something about food in animation anyway, which can be incredibly alluring. There's certain I know it's certain things where you kind of look at it and go, I wish I had that. I really wish I had that. Even if it's like the complete flat 2D thing, and like there's just a certain style that comes off it, like, oh, this piece of pizza looks amazing in one piece of animation, and in another it's terrible, absolutely terrible. And I'm like, oh, absolutely not. Why are these characters eating that? And in this, I think food is such an inspiration, and it is such, a joy for these characters that we need to kind of see it a bit more. So it can't be half-assed. So I can't say about the reasons for actually going to Paris when they could have just got out a cookbook or gone to some Parisian-themed restaurants in America. However, if you want the authentic experience, and if it's also actually going to help animators get a vibe for Paris in general, I know, you're not just going to go there to go to restaurants. You're going to want to kind of look around, for, any kind of inspiration and guidance on how you're going to animate these streets, or what kind of signage you want to use, anything like that. That's going to help build this bigger picture. So, I mean, and if it was just for a few days, why not? If they're like, okay, we need a month in Paris, we're going to go to high-end restaurants every single night, we're going to stay in a 5-star the entire time, and that's when it's like, okay. But I think we're going on a week-long trip to kind of take a look at, one, the restaurants and the food, but then also any other additional things that we can note down here or pick up. So I will give them a pass for this. It'd be different if everything was shoddy and it looked terrible. It's like, well, clearly they paid more attention to eating than to, inspiration for the animation itself.
It is a fun one, and kind of with that as well. One of the animators at Pixar, I couldn't get his name, and I wanted to find more details on this. There's an animator at Pixar working on this film who had previously been a, quote, former professional chef. Now, I'm rubbish at cooking. I can cook when I want to, when I'd like to, but some people enjoy it, and I respect people that really enjoy it, that put the effort in. For me personally, it's a lot of time that can be wasted for something that can go in 10, 15 minutes. That's my honest thoughts, always has been. So like, unless I'm putting on... Yeah, it's true. Like, unless I'm making something for other people, I've got no interest.
I agree with you, yeah.
Oh, I completely get it. Yeah.
And it's... So this guy ends up stopping being a former... Well, he's a professional chef, quits, goes into animation, works at Pixar, and they end up doing a film about food, and he becomes one of the... Not even a lead animator, there's not any details, but he basically became the professional reference, maybe we call it. And I was just sort of sat there like, surely that should have been a promotion for this film, right? Like, shouldn't that have been like supervisor? Shouldn't there have been like a name tag? This is going to be that person in the team that every company has where they just chuck them more work because they're more experienced in something. This was a film probably you're not going to... Has there been any other Pixar films about food? I don't think so.
I've not seen it yet.
Yeah.
I mean, I suppose a lot of people eat fish.
Yeah. The food stories.
Some people eat bugs.
Wow, we haven't got that sequel. That's a different conversation. I got very upset about that one. He'll set off again. But we have had 3 Cars films. But I just find it interesting. I mean, like I said, it's a nice jovial chat with the animation and food, but there is logic for them to go to Paris. And I do like the fact that when we go to Paris, it does feel authentic. And maybe, I don't know if you guys have both been to Paris. Again, I'm talking about them 12 years old. Obviously, you see videos online. it's not the nicest of cities, which I think is a bit of a common consensus now. That whilst it's got all the romantic ideals, one of my best friends just got proposed there. He got engaged on New Year's Day there, which looked lovely with the Eiffel Tower. He won't be watching this, but it's very much a city that I like many cities. You turn a corner and there's a really like grim part. Except with Paris, it's like you see the grim bits, and it's like bags of rubbish in the street stacked up high. And I'm not going to get into like politics of Birmingham bin strikes, but it looks a bit like Paris. But again, you turn a corner and it's lovely. There's the Eiffel Tower, or there's Disneyland, and there's this. Paris is a very interesting city, and I think this film does a good job at showing that when you get to that weird, well, I guess it's like a mousetrap shop. That's apparently a real shop in Paris. So they must have found that like when they were there, or been researching like other shops that sell mousetraps. The dead rats hanging up in the window was quite powerful imagery for a Pixar film, I'm going to add. And you could also imagine that being very real, like in the streets, that they probably would do that. Weird tangent on Paris. Have you both been? Am I just waffling and unintentionally sounding racist, which isn't the intention?
No, I've been once for a day when I was young. And so famously there's this I don't know, I mean, it's not a medical condition, but this thing called Paris syndrome. Have you heard of this? There's a thing called Paris syndrome, which is it's like a type of depression that's noted in tourists, particularly for some reason, Japanese tourists. I think because of the way that Paris culturally is like sort of idealized and romanticized within Japanese culture, that there's this term that comes from Japan called Paris syndrome, whereby tourists go to Paris and they get like really depressed and disillusioned because it doesn't live up to what they imagined. And this is like a real thing, apparently. Ironically, a friend of my partner, sort of idealizes Japanese culture, apparently, and went to Japan recently and had this kind of like reverse Paris syndrome where Tokyo wasn't what it was cracked up to be. But it's like it's a real like phenomenon where people apparently have sort of been to Paris and been really sort of depressed by it. And I have to admit that my own sort of very small experience when I was young. So when I was a kid, I got obsessed with the French Revolution, which is not a bad kind of, childhood obsession. This was before James Bond came along, but for a time I was really into the French Revolution and reading anything I could about it. I was desperate to go to Paris. My mum and her partner at the time said, okay, we can go to Paris. We'll do a day in Disneyland Paris. We'll do a day in Paris. And we stayed overnight in like the shittiest hotel in the shittiest part of town that you could imagine. I remember looking out the window and thinking, this doesn't feel like Paris. So I had a sort of small version of it myself. So it's getting sort of both sides of Paris in this film was a good achievement, I think. I mean, clearly it plays into the sort of French romanticism, particularly with the music. I'm sure we'll talk about it later, but I am sort of pleased that it, even the fact that this is like a haute cuisine restaurant that has like lost its stars, and it's not doing the kind of city of love kind of tropes that we're very used to from other films. And I do respect that. I respect that it sort of goes straight down the middle with it and plays with this sense of aspiration and reality that when you think about it is like part of Remy's story as well. So that's my Paris experience. I would like to go back at some point, but with no illusions, importantly.
Yeah, I've not been, unfortunately. I went to Disneyland Paris once when I was 8, but even that's like so cloudy to me in memories, just because of when it was, which is like a really weird, difficult time in my family's life. But Paris has always been kind of thing that's dotted around everything. It's in kind of every kind of form of media at some point or another. And it's so kind of, to me, intrinsically linked with Disney. Like there's always in one generation a film that's either set in Paris or has a section in Paris. It always feels like it goes there. Like if it's not something that's just set in a general location or in a random different time period, if it's modern or somewhat modern, there's a good chance it could be in Paris. And so it's kind of nice that, Craig, you're right, where it's kind of that it's romanticized in this film, but not to such an extent that it feels unnatural. Like there's definitely is kind of a joy when Remy first, appears in Paris and realizes where he is, and you kind of feel that with him. Yeah, it's kind of that, and I don't want to sound pretentious, where it's like we just see kind of the facade of it, and then there's an underbelly which is kind of just not so great, which is true of any place, I guess. But I think for us, we've got to see as much joy as possible. I think that's why it hits so hard when Remy does kind of see that shop, and you just kind of go, "Oh, this is rough." And then, of course, the reactions, after, right before the ending about, a rat doing cooking and stuff, and kind of how people can be. But I do think it's probably fit for this film. I mean, obviously, it's in the title Ratatouille. It's a famous dish from. It's got to be there, and I remember putting in my Letterboxd review of this that I didn't really enjoy the opening too much, but then once we got to Paris, I felt like, okay, we the film's really starting now, and I'm more on board with it, and I had more enjoyment of it. And we don't see too much of Paris. A lot of it is in the restaurant, but we get enough to kind of get a good sense of what this place is, what it means. I think it was the right choice. But hopefully one day we'll go to Paris. I mean, what you were saying, George, about your friend getting engaged on New Year's Day, all I could think of was I'm going to bring it back to James Bond and Dominique in Nightfire on New Year's Eve, and they see in the new year together. It's very cute in Paris. So that's my reference there, out of the way.
I could really take this conversation down with a Paris reference. Not anything disrespectful, but I had a sibling met during a terrorist attack. Let's awkwardly move on. I don't even know if I've told you that, Sam, before.
Wow.
But that was not a fun 12 hours to be sat at home not getting through to your sister. Again, Paris. I'm really awkwardly segueing away from that now, and how the university wouldn't pay to get the students home a day earlier. Good $9,000 a year. Well done, Cobb Uni. But let's talk a bit of the story. We've talked a lot about the story, the rat cooking the food. I'm not going to be lazy and say let's get into characters, but to me the characters are the story, right? That everything is through them, their relationships with one another, the background. Let's kickstart with Remy, voiced by Patton Oswalt, who is an actor that I really like. And I've always felt Patton Oswalt, I'm not calling him a star, that sounds so cringy. I love that Pixar do not have to put household names in every film. And I feel like every couple of episodes I've had a sort of pop at this. You can get your Tom Hanks and your Tim Allens. And you can also have a Patton Oswalt. If you're casting the right person with the right voice for the right character, I do not care if they're an A-lister. I don't care if it's their first acting gig or if they're a voice actor, what their history is. And I really like the cast put together for Ratatouille as a whole, because there are names in here that I had no idea were in Ratatouille that I would never have known unless I checked out the IMDb page and seeing who is in it. For example, Will Arnett is in Ratatouille. That did not compute at all. And when I went back and searched the characters, I can hear it now, but without knowing that, it's really not obvious, considering he's got an incredibly distinct voice as well. For anyone that's seen Arrested Development or Lego Batman, he has a fantastic voice.
BoJack
I had
Horseman.
no idea. Oh, of course he is in that as well. Yeah, I've not seen it, but I know he's the lead in it, isn't he? But Remy, Patton Oswalt, where I was going with that.
Yeah.
I think he's perfect as Remy. He has the right, this sounds really horrible. He has an innocent arrogance about him that he loves food, and we can see through his character when the screen will cut to dark and it's nothing but Remy in the animation frame. I think that's quite ballsy for an animation studio to do that. And I know the logic is, shut your eyes, you're in his head, but they did a very good job at building up this character to have this connection to food. And I loved the in-house joke of, his dad was buzzing because that meant they've got a rat that can sniff out the poison, which, you can see he's basically depressed at doing that for a job. There's all these little intricacies that I think Patton Oswalt, I'd say he's a very underrated character actor, and most people will know him for smaller roles in comedies, is probably a better way of saying it. For me, I've liked him in most things I've seen him in. Parks and Rec's always my go-to. And obviously, many years before Disney acquired Lucasfilm, he did the very famous... Was it just after they acquired them? He did the Boba Fett monologue. So I forgot the term for it in American politics. Filibuster, is that it? When basically you're just told, the floor is yours. Do whatever you want.
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys know the Parks and Rec story that he basically took it and did this 10, 15-minute speech about how he would do Star Wars 7 and how it opened up with Boba Fett coming out of the Sarlacc pit. All of this stuff. But all the Parks and Rec cast are all there in character, trying their absolute hardest to not laugh, to let it go through. I think he's a great comedic actor. I love that we got him in a Pixar film. And I'll say this is a complimentary. I'm sure they could find another actor like Patton Oswalt, but I see this character and I sat there thinking, this is Patton Oswalt. This is his character. It's probably maybe what he's best known for people that know of him. I don't think he's a household name outside of, can I say it nicely, outside of like film fans. I don't think you could show a picture of him to like a random in the street, be like, who's this guy? I don't think they'd know, but film people probably would. And I'd like Remy and I like him. Not my favorite Pixar lead. I will really hammer that down, but I like him a lot more than I thought. This was a film I was a little bit nervous. Like, is this not going to work for me? Like, 15, 20 years later, is this going to be something I like oof? But it went the other way. And I think he's not the main reason why, but he's a good proportion as to why.
I think for me, he maybe is the main reason. Various things about the story, make it a good film for me. But out of the central characters, I don't know, like Remy... it sounds wild to say because again he's a rat. Like, he seems the least ridiculous of the central characters, and the most kind of grounded in a way. And I do think it's down to that performance. So I resisted the temptation to look up who the voice actors were whilst I was watching this, because I'm really bad usually at picking voices out of animations and matching them to the pictures of the voice cast in my head. But I thought I'd have a go. I was rubbish at it, so I did have to look it up. And then I was like, oh, okay, yeah, I can match the voice to the face now. I've definitely seen this guy before. But I couldn't think what I'd seen him in. And I think he's just got one of those faces that will be familiar to people, but really hard to place, which is no slight on him. Like, it's I think notable that he's been in so many things and he stood out to people in them, but usually, as you say, George, like in smaller parts, I think. And I think for me, it was probably 22 Jump Street, where he's a history professor and has a really excellent scene with, I think it's with Channing Tatum, that stuck out in my mind, where he does a really good, it's just a small detail, but he does a really good like desk slap and then sort of gesticulates very firmly in Channing Tatum's way, that really stuck in my mind. So I think that he's really well cast, but I also think that as Remy, he really becomes the sort of heart and soul of the film, because it says a lot that out of that core cast, he is the character that feels the most grounded and the most relatable in a way, the least ridiculous.
Yeah, I guess. I was trying to think, like, is that so? But I mean, the thing with Remy as a character is that he has a goal. Like, he knows what he wants to do and he knows what he's good at. So he goes and gets it. And I think I mentioned before, obviously just tying into the story about the beginning of the film, and I kind of found him a little bit frustrating as a character to watch. It made me think about Flick from A Bug's Life a little bit. I think if there's any kind of similarity between this and another Pixar film up to this point, that's probably the most, where it's kind of, one member of a giant family slash group, which is thinking, has either a completely different mindset, or what's the word, ideas outside of the norm, aspirations, which isn't a bad thing, but it can be a detriment to everyone else, which we see with in A Bug's Life, Flick's invention ruins all the food, and that leads to all the events that happen. Remy in this, part of his actions lead to the rats having to leave. And obviously in both of those cases, it leads to, the endings where both in A Bug's Life and in Ratatouille, these animals have a happy ending, and it leads to better circumstances. But it's all being done because this character was, selfish. And I think you are having to go through a journey where it's like, okay, well, they're doing this to get to this point, and we get it. But I think that's why I didn't like Remy too much. But I think when he's alone, and his drive is not to he thinks, right, his family's lost all that. My drive is to continue to do what I want to do. There is some form of kind of, do you know what? Respect. You're wanting to do that. I think that Patton Oswalt is someone that I think a lot of people outside of the US probably wouldn't know, if, or at least any kind of the average person. So if I went to my parents now, or any of my friends, do you know Patton Oswalt? The likelihood is that they'd say no. If I showed some of them a picture, some of them may know. But he isn't someone that I know too much of. I've heard his name many, many times as being part of projects. I think my main thing, honestly, of him is that he's the voice of adult Adam Goldberg in the Goldbergs. His voice is kind of so synonymous with kind of this character that we never see, or at least the old version of this character that we don't see, which is just weird. But yeah, I think he does a brilliant job, and I think the innocence is what I was going to say, but I think that innocent arrogance is also kind of spot on, because he is kind of frustrating as well in the film, like throughout, where he kind of thinks, I know better, all this and that, yet he actually does, because the proof is in the pudding, or in the ratatouille and the food. Like, he is the reason why this restaurant is a success. And you'd be annoyed if someone was getting credit for all the work that you were doing. So I understand like his frustration, and that he's kind of made this promise to himself from Gusto that anyone can cook. He's kind of taken that and ran with it. So I think it's a great performance. I would find it difficult to think of anyone else who could do it as well. Patton Oswalt finds like the sweet spot, I think, for that character. I think it could have swayed one way or another with any other performer, to be honest.
Yeah, I find it fascinating, particularly with, when you said at the start, Sam, as well, it doesn't quite, not click, but he's quite arrogant, but there's a love that comes from it, that he puts them all in jeopardy because of that. Craig, you go in as well with the motivations, absolutely.
No, go ahead, George.
I was just going to say that it's hard to like him at the opening for me, because I always call Woody a narcissist in Toy Story. Like, he's a character I never really liked. And I'll be honest, I still don't like him that much, but I appreciate him. I like Tom Hanks, but it's very difficult to get to grips to like him, really, until I say really, I've just never really grown to him. But with Remy, he's putting everyone in jeopardy over this love of food, the colony coming down from the ceiling. Then I'm going to add, by the way, a strange visual, but the opening, when they shout "get to the boats," I don't know why I love that moment. That like they've got this contingency escape plan by a river. They've had this. I don't know how many weeks, days, months, or years they might have been hiding in this old woman's attic, but they already know these boats are like tucked aside. It reminds me of something like you'd see out of like, I don't know, North Vietnam, because they wouldn't get boats out, but some like secret military operation. I love that, but it's going back to what was said that once you get to Paris, the film kicks into gear, right? And then it's much more enjoyable and watchable. But at that point, I'm like, I'm not vibing with Remy, if I'm going to say it. But it's not the performance. I think it's the intention of how they write him, that he's meant to want more. He doesn't just want to be a rat conforming to their society. And I do like that outcast. And I think the Bugs Life comparison is very fair as well, because there's a lot of comparisons to Bugs Life with the story. You know, he's looked down as the runt of the group. He's responsible for this. There's a hierarchy and he's not following it. He just needs to take his place to allow it. So there's some really good comparables to the other Pixar stuff, but it definitely comes into its own with Remy. But I'll hand over to you, Craig, because I almost segued into Linguini then. But I'll yeah.
No, well, yeah, I have some thoughts on Remy. I mean, I'm so pleased for the little boats, because I specifically jotted that down. I absolutely loved that moment, like the kind of reveal that they've had these boats prepared for if they need to have a speedy exit. Yeah, I absolutely loved that. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, I think this is maybe where you also sort of bring something of yourself to the film, right? And you like your own values and stuff. This kind of tension that Remy feels between this individualistic streak, frankly, and like the needs of like the colony or the collective runs like throughout the film, and it's like one that I feel myself as well quite often. And I think it's when it's bound up in family and the idea that like, well, your collective or your colony should also be your family. That's actually quite a tricky position to be in sometimes, especially if you're not necessarily like that individualistic, that you don't want to have a kind of collectivity that you're beholden to, but the one that you grew up in isn't necessarily the one that you want to owe something to in future or be accountable to in future. Like, I think was kind of quite familiar for me. It like sort of struck a certain chord, like that Remy, he's obviously, maybe it's because like when I grew up, I was like the kind of the bookish one in the family, go figure, like, and Remy's sort of saying these things like about making these quips about cleanliness is next to godliness, which is like a sort of like a John Wesley quote, like the Methodist minister, and he's like sort of presented as like being like, he's got this like talent in terms of his nose, but he's also like literate. He walks on 2 feet. He is, who's like quoting things from literature, and he's not like understood by his family at all. And they have this like return party, which he's like grateful for, and he's like pleased to see them initially, but then the way they treat him is that they're like, well, the important thing is your home, and he's sort of written off as a bit of a snob for having these other sort of divergent interests, which actually I don't think he is. And I think we see that he wants to sort of do them a favor and stuff, and it's actually, I think, their treatment of Remy and sort of taking him for granted that lands him in trouble in the end. So maybe I'm a bit out on a limb here, but I definitely do think Woody is a narcissist. I totally think that. And I think that Flick, is it, in A Bug's Life, like has this kind of really like a much more of a naivety. I think there's clearly a naivety in Remy's character, but like he's a really, really like naive character, I think, from what I remember. But Remy, I don't know, I found myself sort of identifying with him a little bit and feeling trapped between these two worlds. He wants to be in this world that's radically different from the one that he's been in, but is still kind of tied to and drawn back to the world that he's come from. I always remember thinking about it because I went to go and visit yesterday the wife of a friend who passed away a couple of years ago, and we grew up in the same like ex-mining town in the north, and we're at school together, and thick as thieves very much started in the same place. And then I went off to university and went kind of as far as you could go in that, and he went off and did an apprenticeship and worked in the steel industry, and then like other kind of like factory work and stuff. And despite the fact that like he by the age of 30 was on like a 65k a year job because he had a trade, and I was on like 15 grand a year as a sort of postdoc researcher, to him I was the one with the kind of ideas above my station, and he would sort of tease me for it, of being kind of effete and snobbish and stuff. I remember going to see him once where he was like do you want a brew? And I was like, oh yeah, I'll have a coffee please. And he's like, how'd you take it? I said, oh, I have it black. And he's like, oh my god, he's gone off to uni and drinking black coffee. They are sugar. Do you want a croissant with that? And like and I kind of got a few of those vibes. So maybe it's just because of that experience of going to visit his partner yesterday that was sort of brought back for me. But I definitely felt like Remy, for me, there was at least something there. He's maybe a little bit he's a bit stuffing up his own arse in places. He could tone it down a couple of notches, but there was something sort of fundamental about the sort of tension that he finds himself in that I did sort of identify with a little bit.
Yeah, I definitely think you can identify, especially like when you've had different backgrounds. Like, oh god, I like to family therapy. It's like, my granddad did this for his thing, and my dad did this, and then the oldest of the siblings did this, and they all did the same thing. And I'm like, no, I want to do film. It's like, no, you'll be an engineer. Yeah. No, I won't. And I'm not, and I won't be still. And it is fascinating how that stuff does play. And again, putting those themes in animated kids film is very like, again, quite ballsy to do, and it is that appreciation for art. Not to get into that, but this is the whole AI can't do this. It can't. It just cannot at all. And even with Linguini, who in this I really like, voiced by Lou Romano, who isn't a traditional voice actor. He's part of the Pixar group, if we can call it that. Obviously, Pixar is a lot of their writers, animators for voices, people that have worked at the company. I love this idea that he was just this kid. He just needed a job. His mom's obviously just passed away. He's clearly nervous. He doesn't know what he's doing there. And the bond they form. And when we did the oh God, I can't remember if I spoke this during Bug's Life or if it was on Toy Story 2. We basically spoke about the fact that Pixar goes into doing not what's the word I'm looking for? Like not double acts, but flicks like a solo sole protagonist of the film. But then every other one, you've got Woody and Buzz. Woody and Buzz again, technically, although they split up. Mike and Sully. Dory and Nemo's dad, if you want to say that. You've got Lightning McQueen and Mater. Yes, Mater. Yeah. They nailed the concept of the double act. And Linguini and Ratatouille are that in this. And I find it fascinating for them as a student. It's not something people have spoke about before that I love Bug's Life. I'm not saying they've got anything wrong, but they almost nailed, okay, so how do we do these moving forward? And it isn't just, it's not just going to stop with Ratatouille, there's going to be Wall-E very soon. There's going to be Up very soon, which is more of these double acts that keep going and going and going with the original ideas. And I think Linguini is a big part of that. And what I love about his story, and the same thing, maybe my biggest criticism of the film, I love that he is the unknown son. That his mom had wrote this letter to say, he's going to inherit this. And I was like, oh, we're going to get like a family politics drama. Like, this is the real story that I've got no recollection of. And I don't know if this might come into when we talk about Skinner as well, but I hate the resolution that it's like click of a finger, fade to black. Like, Linguini's now the son. He's inherited the company. It's all his. He's running it hunky-dory. Let's get straight into the final acts. Happens a bit soon for me. Whereas I was really intrigued by the idea that, he's going to find out that this could be and should be his. Someone's going to stop that. He doesn't want this, but he's going to be a part of it. And I feel there's something missing in that between Act 2 and Act 3, where when it cuts to black, when they get the letter, okay, he's a great, newspaper compilation. Aha, it's him all along. I just think, is that one of the things they struggled with going back to the behind the scenes? They don't know how to get to that ending part because the third act feels so strange. And that's all I can say, that they've got this ingenious build-up. They've built up their relationship, working together, training together to be able to cook these great things. They've hit a sweet spot, and then just the film's pivoted instantly. Because again, it's not taking anything away from Linguini. It's not criticism as a character. I like that, but it's just something to me that ever so slightly didn't work.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. Like, one thing that occurred to me when I was watching it, and I'm going to get a bit wanky for a second, but this is the Bond Again way. But like, I thought about, so there's a political theorist called Bourdieu who has this sort of theory of different forms of capital, and he talks about cultural capital, social capital, and symbolic capital. So cultural capital kind of comes from it's an alternative way of thinking about class, basically, that's not economic. And cultural capital comes from, maybe like the music you listen to or the films that you've seen, and it's a kind of like a certain form of cultural currency that bestows on you a certain place and position within like a class society. And this is like what really characterizes like Remy's character for me. But the fact that like Linguini like can't cook and he's a nobody and stuff, like he doesn't have any of these sort of forms of capital, and suddenly he comes into both like a symbolic and social capital. So social because of whose son he is. He's the son of this sort of prestigious guy, and symbolic because the connection to his dad and his dad's kind of status within that particular type of world, like is somehow like meaningful, and it just like catapults him to like the top of like that world in a way that, I mean, I said it before, like, the cooking rat was not the unbelievable moment for me, but this very much was. And I agree, like for me it did sort of take me out of the film a little bit and became a bit of a different sort of film, because for Remy, like his kind of, as all the things I mentioned before, like the relationship with his family and this kind of desire that he has for a different kind of life that's tied in with this really like there's something about cultural capital is like very sort of brittle, right? Like, because in a way it's just sort of like taste and references. It's not like real in the way that like economic capital or symbolic capital can be. And Linguini effectively comes into this, plus inheriting literally the restaurant itself, so like a form of economic capital as well, and just gets kind of like catapulted to the top of the tree in a way that didn't feel like totally satisfying. End of wankiness.
Continue wank. No, I'm not. No, it's interesting because I think Linguini is a character I think works really well within the confines of this story. I think Lou Romano does a really good job. I think the relationship between Linguini and Remy is lovely. I think I prefer, honestly, the relationship between Linguini and Colette. To me, that's more interesting. And I think this may be potential for even bigger story to be told there. I think because I think Colette is probably the character that I enjoy the most, because unlike any of the others, I understand her and her perspective way more. And maybe this is just me and my obsession with female characters in films, but she is kind of the primary / only female character in this film, which that's its own thing anyway. But yeah, I think it's a little bit soap opera, like for me, like, oh, it's the missing son who it's, and I feel like the reveal for us is a bit too soon, and I feel like despite me enjoying the film a lot more regardless of kind of the main plot points when we're in Paris, that kind of pacing is a bit annoying because it feels like that is going to be the natural conclusion, that the secret is going to be revealed. And it feels like they had a choice between two endings and they chose to go with an ending that would step away from that because you could reveal that secret, but then there's a whole other secret about Remy. So you could have ended it in a way that wouldn't be fair to Remy as a character, for him to still be in control, but Linguini to have Gusto's restaurant and that to be the success and that would be the ending. Or you can make it so that it's something that's natural for both of these characters. So I feel like the actual conclusion that we get is actually, I really like the ending, the proper ending, but it feels like how we get there is rather contrived, and I don't think it helps, the characters. I like that Linguini understands, and basically has the balls to fight, well, you know what, Remy is the one who knows his stuff and I'm going to support him rather than, taking advantage of what Remy's doing just because he knows Remy enjoys cooking and can do it very well. So yeah, but I mean, like as I said, I think I like the love story. I do think it's a little bit, but I like what Colette does for him, and I kind of like that. He obviously has an influence on her, and I like that she supports him still. That she kind of takes stock of what's going on, which is a rather unbelievable thing, to put it mildly, and to actually go, well, do you know what? I get why this has happened, and I'm going to put my ego out of it. When she very easily and quite rightfully probably should have just been like, do you know, no, this is it. Like, absolutely not. So yeah.
I feel that there's a good skin of talk point. Where it doesn't work for me is there's two antagonists in this film, right? Antagonist number one, you've got the incredible Peter O'Toole playing Anton Ego, the food critic. And then you've also got Ian Holm playing Skinner. Skinner's not really known as a villain until like halfway through. And it just feels like the head chef should be the head chef, not an evil character, but tougher, nastier, the Gordon Ramsay role. And then you stick to your critic as the villain, because they established early on this one guy did this one review which killed them. It literally killed Gusto. And we're going to have scenes of him in his lair, literally talking about how he's going to destroy them. And the Skinner stuff feels at the start like comedic, like chasing them around type thing. And then it turns into, like he's kind of the main villain, but I'm not entirely sure I get it. And I think that's where it loses me ever so slightly, this film, which I think stops it from being top tier Pixar. And it's still a very good film. But it's just the difference of Skinner and Ego, because for a start, even though Ian Holm was in this, he does a very good French accent, as I guess you'd expect from a proper thespian. And I will say, actually, I'll credit the Americans too, everyone's French accents are actually good. Even John Ratzenberger, who's in every Pixar film, who we can still hear it's him, and said that he basically, because of his accent, would try and do an Italian accent instead of French, and it sounded like it, which I thought was funny. But I think it loses me the different antagonists, because I don't care for Skinner as a villain. I think it's a bit too on the nose. Whereas Anton Ego, I love this character. I know he's a meme now. When he eats the soup and you go back, it's always like a nostalgia meme now. But this idea of this cynical food critic who basically hates all the food that he's going to be eating, clearly at restaurants, he's got agendas against certain ones. He's got the power to shut people down. He's the final boss. He's the final act. The final act is him going to the restaurant. The fact he's got intimidation on the waiters, the fact they're afraid of him, he wants him to cook something new, to cook something different. It really surprised me how important he was in this film. And I have to say, it was maybe my favorite character in this film, because I love a good antagonist. I love a good villain. You get a legendary British actor with gravitas. And I know I said it to you, Sam, before we hit live. I was like, not that I'm saying I'm criticizing Peter at all, but I was like, oh man, like he's a vampire. He should be Christopher Lee. Like he literally has his own castle where resides in. The camera has him lingering, and I think I read that the animators wanted him to be a vulture, and I was just sat there like I'm not having him as a vulture at all. To me, he's a vampire. He's like the antithesis of this, and I think he's perfect for that villain stuff.
Yeah, fair enough. I do agree. I think there are, at one point in the film, there's just too many storylines going on, and I'm like, is this like an A plot, a B plot? Like this is CD. I'm not sure. Like the sort of Skinner, actually, almost also the will inheritance stuff. Is far less interesting to me than some of the other threads. Even the relationship between Linguini and Colette, like. I'm not against them, the sort of the love theme coming in, but it does come out a little bit out of nowhere. I think that you wouldn't necessarily have to have a romantic relationship there for there to be like a platonic love and sort of bonds there, because I think that's the real sort of strength. But I also think that for a time, and it only happens, only sort of occurs for maybe 20 minutes or so, but the film threatens to betray what it set itself up as being about, because we have this sort of tension between Remy and the dad about this kind of whether you can't change nature or whether change is nature, right? And the film clearly wants to say that change is nature, and so there's a sort of a tension between like received wisdom and education or something like that, and when Remy suddenly gets like reinstated as not Remy, sorry, Linguini is suddenly kind of given this, not even reinstated, but given this kind of inheritance, and is allowed to sort of step into the shoes of Gusteau. Well, that's a reversion to like quote unquote nature, right? Like it's like, oh, we've kind of got the bloodline back in place, so now we can kind of revert to that. Whereas I feel like what the if the film was sort of going to be true to itself, it would say, well, yes, he might be Gusteau's son, but that doesn't mean he has to be like the head of the restaurant or something, because change is nature, in fact. And so I do think the film sticks the landing, but I feel like it's kind of success like snatched from the jaws of defeat a little bit, because I really, really like the ending of this. And when Ego, Peter O'Toole's character, comes back into the limelight, it really accelerates for me, sort of ascends in a good way. And I remember the first time I saw this, actually kind of tearing up a little bit at his kind of childhood flashback. And I think they do that stuff really well, and the very very end of the film as well, where in fact Ego himself has changed his life and his kind of professional standing to accept that change is nature as well. So yeah, that's kind of how I feel about it. But I do feel like for a time it threatens to go in the wrong direction and sort of sabotage its own message in a way, and to do that whilst also just sort of throwing too many plots together feels like it does teeter on the edge of being a bit of a car crash for a time.
Yeah, I do agree, and I think they find as much balance as they can within the story and plot that they've set out. But I do think it does hinder kind of the whole antagonist element. Like, I think I like that Ego is, sprinkled throughout the film. Like, he's not there a lot, but he is this presence where it's like he is the reason for Gusteau's demise ultimately, and he reappears when he hears that the restaurant is doing better, and it's like, oh, we'll see about that. And then obviously he gets like his reintroduction later on, whereas Skinner is more this bumbling selfish fool who I understand. do kind of understand why, what his motivations are. I get it. I don't think he's ultimately a bad guy, but I do think it's a bit stereotypical. I think, George, you mentioned, something about that. It is like this stereotypical, French chef who's, gets mad and angry and stuff, which I think we kind of have seen too many of those anyway. Although I will say, big massive props to Ian Holm, because I had no idea it was him. I think he's so versatile. I was shocked when I found out it was him. I think he's brilliant in that role, and I think he kind of gives that everything that he can. But Ego is the more interesting character, especially once you get those flashbacks once he tries the food and is like, oh my god. And Peter O'Toole's so theatrical, and you can feel, it's like you can feel every word. It's very weird. Like, he's just so good at it, and I think that's why it's kind of good that he's not in it too much, because I think it makes the scenes that he's in really powerful. And he kind of elevates the scenes when they really could just be a bit less. So as much as I'm totally on board with the Christopher Lee element, I'm very glad that we got Peter O'Toole. But no, I think having that be the conclusion and him being kind of the step to overcome, I think that it makes the ending feel so much more earned, that despite his review and all that, the restaurant still gets shut down. They're like, well, do you know what, we'll do our thing. I think it works. It's just kind of, it's unfortunate that kind of the transition from the second to the third act feels kind of messy, and it feels like they didn't know how to get from A to B, and it just doesn't feel supernatural. It doesn't feel natural. Like, don't want ghosts to appear. We've already got these weird. We've already got Gusto like just randomly kind of popping up for Remy. But no, I think despite that, I think the characters themselves are pretty good, especially Ego. And yeah, there was something else I was going to say, but I've completely forgot. So I'm just going to hand it back to you, George.
No, I wanted to bring up Ego because I never call myself a film critic, but there's something that really got me in his amazing monologue at the end, where in the year 2007, which really has to be taken into account, 2007, this is being said, but I'm pretty sure the words he say is, we thrive on negative criticism, which is fun to write and fun to read. Something along those lines, right? And I sat there like, he's just epitomized the last 25 years of YouTube critics. And maybe not 25 years is a bit unfair, but in the modern day, the 10 years that have gone by, if anyone's into their sport, I'm talking like AFTV, vloggers, laser eye thumbnails, the shouty. Okay, you guys, the Bond podcast, right? And I'm not going to take it from the next episode. People are kicking off about the new James Bond game because out of context, the developers basically said, politely, James Bond's evolved a bit since the 1950s. And the full statement is he still has all the traditions that you would expect from James Bond. But no one's interested in the second half of that sentence because they're all living off the first. And I just thought it was a great speech anyway, the way it was written, the delicacy of it, the performance, the animation, the voice acting. But it just really hit me like, Christ almighty, nothing's really changed. And that could have come out in the late 80s and we'd be sat there thinking it probably was the same. And I like this film rather than, I've got to be careful how I say it now. I cannot remember the film that I saw or the TV show that did this, but they basically bring up, was it X-Men? Was it X-Men? Was it Bryan Singer? No, that was the classic. The third film's always the worst in a trilogy. They say about Return of the Jedi, so they make one of the worst X-Men films. But there's something I'd seen where it's like a director's going at a journalist or it's going at a critic big time. And you can tell this isn't parody, this isn't story, this is an agenda. Genuinely, that the maker of this is something in it because someone said something about them before. Whereas this deals with criticism in a very, I'd say, honorable way, that is an older person rediscovering what that means to them and they become a caricature of themselves. I'm not going to point names or fingers, Mark Commode, but it reminds me of those sorts of things where going back to him as a kid, rediscovering something for the simplicity of why he loved it. I like that in films, and I just think Ratatouille, the current state of criticism, whether it not just be film, whether it be TV people, gaming people, I don't know enough about those sorts of platforms, football fans, sports fans, I don't know. But it was a great speech, and kind of what you said, Sam, I love the ending that, yes, the food inspector cannot allow a rat restaurant to continue. Yes, not all the staff are going to come back. I know it's animated, I know it's Pixar, it doesn't need realism. But I like the idea that this very famous restaurant with a legacy was closed. But that gave them all the freedom to do their own thing. And the fact that Ego would invest in this new restaurant as well, which I also really liked, that his character comes full circle. He's probably in, 4 to 5 scenes maximum? And he's probably got a better character arc than maybe everyone bar Remy. Or maybe he has the best character arc of all. Maybe that's my controversial opinion, that Ego's got the best character arc in the entire film. But I really love the ending. Yeah, I've said out loud. I think it is true. I think to take the cynical older, living off their own reputation type character, literally living in a castle. I'm sure they show him in a castle. You know, when it's like Darth Vader. It's like when the Emperor's staff go up to Darth Vader to be like, "Oh, you know, they've got away," and it's like, "Oh, that restaurant you hated, they're back and they're doing well." There's a lot of great comical moments, and I think Brad Bird, even looking at The Incredibles, he does a fantastic job of creating Syndrome as a villain, which is also, you could say, probably very modern day as well. You know, the people, not everyone lives up to expectations in Soul Factor culture, all that stuff. I think Brad Bird's had a lot of fun with Ego. But sorry to keep talking about Ego. So, do you want to add anything more on him or Skinner before we get into
I was going to add something on Ego, which is just to say that I would probably even go so far as to say that I think if they hadn't, because they nail that monologue of his, and I think if that hadn't happened, this wouldn't be half the film that it is, because I really do think that it, you know, and particularly the way the film ends, you know, it sounds really trite to say it, but when you finish watching, when you leave the cinema, like that's the thing that's sticking in your mind. When I think, you know, before rewatching this recently, to all those years ago, like how I think Ratatouille ends, it's all about Ego, and I think that the coming like as an investor into a new venture is very kind of heartwarming. It reminds me, I don't want to spoil it for any viewers, but this ending kind of gets ripped off by another sort of comfort film favorite of mine, which is the Jon Favreau film Chef from 2014, which goes to some similar places, even though it's a sort of different story. Yeah, I think I agree with you. I think that his character arc is probably the best one out of the bunch.
Yeah, I don't have much to add except from that. I do think now that you've said it, I'm like, you know what? I'm more. He's probably it's the arc that I'm more comfortable and satisfied with. Like everything else, I'm like, yeah, sure, and I'm glad to get to where they are. But I'm also glad that by changing this one guy's opinion, or at least making this guy second guess things and think outside of this box that he's kind of put himself in, it changes the trajectory of him, but also these characters as well, which leads to such a happy, nice conclusion. So I'd have to agree. And Craig, you just I've not seen Chef in 10 years, and you've really just made me think about that film because it's been so long since I've seen it. And now I feel like I need to watch that film again because I did quite enjoy it, if I recall.
So good. Did they do a TV show, or was that just Jon Favreau cooking with celebrities? There was something they did during COVID.
There was something, yeah. I didn't see it. I'm not sure what it was, but
I love that film. It's one of the only films ever that just makes you intently hungry from first scene to final scene.
It's a great film, yeah. I've heard it described as it's like the independent film that you make if you've got Scarlett Johansson in your phone book. Like,
Yeah,
which is
yeah,
true.
no, it is.
Really, it's like an indie film, right? But it's like Robert Downey Jr. and Scarlett Johansson in these like little bit parts.
Oh no, that's perfect for it. Yeah, it is. Oh, what a film! I kind of want to watch it now. This Ratatouille didn't make me hungry, but Chef did, so maybe that's where Chef gets the prize on the food discussions. But speaking of someone we've not spoken about yet, Michael Giacchino is back to do his second Pixar score. One of my favorite composers. Of course, he worked with Brad Bird on The Incredibles, his first Pixar film. He'd go on to do many more from this. I love the soundtrack to this film. I think soundtracks are not necessarily difficult to talk about, but I'm not got a background in music, so I can never get into the intricacies musicians can. But the French influence on this, I don't think this film mocks the idea of France. And stay with me when I try and say this out loud, because I've not thought about this, so it could come out wrong. Obviously, Finding Nemo is set in Sydney, so they obviously stack it up with an Australian voice cast for several smaller roles. Very understandable, very fair. This one obviously is a primarily American cast, to put that lightly. Obviously, a couple of Brits here and there. And they're all doing French accents. Now, obviously, as I mentioned, Ian Holmes is incredible because you could genuinely assume that be a French actor. And that's that background, that thespian background. And this might be racist if I'm saying it politely. A lot of Americans would, maybe because I watched this recently, it came out the same year. I'm thinking Spider-Man 3, the French restaurant, where you have, for obvious intentional comedic reasons, you have the caricature French accent. I would assume they would do this for the Pixar film, but they don't. And I'm talking about voice acting on the music, but I'm going to get there. Will Arnett obviously doing his accent, as Ratzenberger and a few others. To have the music have a very traditional French approach, I think goes a long way, that it doesn't just sound American. It doesn't sound like a parody. It doesn't sound like they're mocking or berating it. It's, as we spoke about earlier, with the romance of Paris and with France, that they want that approach, the traditional approach to I was saying, how do you say an approach to France? That sounds so weird. But I think Michael Giacchino does a very good job. But I think the music's make or break on that approach to Paris, because if the music was wrong, I think the film fails as well. No matter how good the cooking may or not be, if you're choosing to set it in this part of the world, you have to really. I don't want to compare it to Black Panther because that's outrageous, but the same way that Ludwig Göransson went to Africa and detailed the African music heritage and history before starting on Black Panther. I'm not saying Giacchino went that far, but you can tell that he is influenced by the music of that country rather than his own traditional musical approach, which, for very polite comparison reasons, Giacchino is always regarded as a John Williams with the classic brass instruments, who does a phenomenal job of those too. But he isn't. He's allowing, like The Incredibles, he's influenced by the 60s James Bond films. And obviously we got the revelation recently that they'd originally had, I don't know if you both know this, did you know this? John Barry was originally doing The Incredibles. And then he departed, Giacchino came in, but he used that as the influence, the 60s Bond music, which is very understandable at the time. So I've waffled way too much about the score, so I'm politely handing over.
Well, I think that I feel like, I listened to the score a couple of times after watching this, and I think that Giacchino strikes the right balance. If every single part of the score was indulging in this kind of, sort of like make-believe Parisian kind of sound, with the kind of concertina and the clarinets and everything, then it would probably get a bit too much. But actually there is a lot of balance there. And even in sections where he's, in quite an ostentatious way, like using all this kind of like French like instrumentation, it's got an undercurrent of jazz sometimes and swing in other parts as well. So he's sort of putting his own stamp on it, and it I think wants to be in conversation with the the action and the kind of energy of the film as much as with the setting and the location. I suppose I kind of feel like Paris in particular is fair game for a bit of this sort of pastiche, because it's such a sort of self-mythologizing place in general. It's like sorry, Sam, close your ears. It's a bit like Manchester in this country, right? Like where it kind of like has like this, or Bristol, to be like fair, like these sort of cities that have these sort of like boosterist sort of like sort of self-aggrandizing senses of what and where they are, because if you think about these sounds that we're hearing in the Giacchino score, particularly early on when it's very sort of scene setting, it's often it's maybe music that we wouldn't necessarily associate with like French, even like French folk music really, but kind of like French like street music, like the sort of thing we might expect to hear buskers playing. But like, who are they playing that for? Really, they're kind of playing it for tourists. Like, it becomes like this sort of like self-perpetuating cycle, right? Of sort of like a mood music to a place. So we can, if we ask someone to imagine the sound of Paris, then like this probably like the same, sort of accordion concertina sort of sounds are going to come into our minds. And so I feel like he deploys that stuff really effectively, but in a very playful way. There is the song that's used at the beginning with the singer Camille, which I think is a sort of a nice touch and a very sort of like genuine, it's sort of genuine touch. So it doesn't just feel like a sort of pastiche. But there's enough going on in the rest of the score that I feel like it does have like an overall balance. And I think the thing that I always look out for with a good score, and this is very much a John Barry thing actually, is that I feel like every score should have its own identity, and it should be an identity that feels as real as the film's identity itself. And this is something that, both Sam and I and many other people like love about Bond scores, is that when they get it right, this is what they do. And the Bond scores that I don't really appreciate are the ones that really could be found on, any film, frankly. Thomas Newman. So I feel like this works beautifully. I feel like Michael Giacchino like nailed it on The Incredibles as well, and obviously goes on to nail it on things like Inside Out. And I can't say it for Ratatouille, but I know people who will listen to the Inside score and like have an emotional reaction to just hearing that music.
I don't know if he's got.
So I think it's a real success on that front.
So you'd frozen, and I didn't know if you'd gone or not. So I was just like, that's right. I did cut into you a little bit there, Craig, but I'm okay to just continue.
Go for it.
George,
Yeah.
So. No, I think with Giacchino, I feel anytime he does a soundtrack, or he composes one, I'm always feeling very comfortable. I feel like he knows what he's doing. I feel like he researches a lot, because, as you said, there's a vibe to this where you could lean in. He does lean into some of the stereotypes of what French sounding score would be, but it's never to the detriment of the film, and it's never something that I think takes the piss out of the film, or takes the piss out of the culture or anything like that. I think it's done very delicately. He doesn't overuse the accordion. He doesn't, just go on that. There's a nice mix of instruments there. Whether it be piano or violin or guitar. There's mixtures of that. And you mentioned Camille with the song La Festine, which I really like. I really like her as an artist. I've had her song Tadaleur in my originally on my iTunes. That's how far back I used to listen to that a lot. So it was a nice surprise when I knew that she sang that song. And yeah, I just think the score in general is brilliant. And we've mentioned Incredibles there, and I think for the average cinema goer, you could listen to both of those and go, oh, these sounds completely different people must have done this. And I think that's how amazing Giacchino is when creating something. I think if he's working on something which is part of an established franchise, he really takes note of what has been created for it before. Adds his own spin, of course, but doesn't stray so far away that it sounds like it isn't it doesn't work as part of that world. And I think that's the good thing about a Pixar film. Ones that aren't sequels anyway, is that you are being given basically the keys to create the sound of this film, and not to be cheesy and wanky, but this is the music is a very important ingredient to Ratatouille and to its success. So I just think it's brilliant, and it's very comforting, and I think that's why I get a little bit sad when some films end anyway, as I think many people do. But when you just hear the music as it pans out from the bistro and then into the credits afterwards, it is like, oh, I could just listen to that even more. I'd like to stay in this world a bit more because of that. And that's kind of the vibe I get. And to me, that's the sign of an amazing soundtrack.
Yeah, and kind of that's two things that on Giacchino is, number one, he truly is the new John Williams, because he's like John Williams for some reason has done every single franchise except a James Bond film.
Yes.
Which is probably I listen. Put all your money on Zimmer for the next one, because Denis in town. He's going to take the Dune composer with him. So I think that's a done deal if I'm allowed to make that prediction. But also because of how winning the Oscar for Up, the opening sequence, the impact of that film, the opening scene, the music, it's almost like people don't talk about his other Pixar stuff other than Up, which is understandable, but kind of not frustrating. But it's like, because everyone always goes back to that, which is absolutely tremendous to go back to. But he's contributed so much. Even the short film One Man Band, he did that entire score. I think it was one of his very first projects, and it's great. And I was very lucky. I got to at a concert. He did that whole at the concert they did that whole short film, which was a lot of fun to see that. But I'm a huge fan of this. You both said he's got the right approach for it. It's what you want from a composer as well, especially with how Pixar have been as a studio. They take that delicate approach, whether it's them going to Paris themselves for a week, as you said, doing their own research, and the composer too. It's the whole studio's got to get working to make it work. And kind of as we slowly ran out of this one, we're going to talk the legacy of this film. So this would get 5 Oscar nominations. And this is always, to me, for anyone that's into their Oscars this side of the year, I'm just going to be really open. If an animated film is nominated for anything other than animated film and best song these days, it's a miracle. Because the Academy, not criticizing any animated films, but the Academy, and in particular the voters, very particularly the older voters, don't regard animation as a proper medium, which is a lie. So it's always a delight when we see things such as Ratatouille, where it was nominated for 5 Oscars, including original screenplay, best animated film, original score, best editing, sound editing, I need to clarify, and sound mixing. And it would obviously win animated film. Now, apparently, Pixar believed they had a chance of winning original screenplay. Although I'm pretty sure this is the year. I mean, There Will Be Blood's adapted, I think. And oh my God, I've forgotten the other film. Might as well be called There Will Be Blood as well. Coen Brothers with Javier Bardem. How on earth has that escaped me? Basically, it's a year, probably wouldn't have won original screenplay, but Pixar believed that they could win it, and Disney basically told them, we're funneling all of our money into you winning Best Animated Film, which is kind of a shame. And I know the criticism of the Oscars is the fact that they, again, animated films won't be looked at anything outside of that, but I'm just more embarrassed that I've forgotten the film that won Best Film that year.
Juno was the film that won Best
Was
Original Screenplay that year. Yeah.
Oh, did it? Oh, wow.
Yep.
Okay. What was nominated? Have you got it on the
You were
screen?
thinking
of Juno?
Yeah, No Country for Old Men, which is the
Is
Coen film, and that was adapted screenplay. Based on the
that's
novel by
annoys
Cormac
me.
McCarthy.
That's kind of outrageous then. Disney didn't try. I mean, I like Juno. I'm not going to criticize Juno. It's a good film. But that is outrageous from Disney. Sorry, for some reason I thought that was it for original. But that obviously did win Best Film. And No Country for Old Men / There Will Be Blood, you could put each name on the other film. They literally filmed it in neighbouring towns, the Casita for filming wild. But on top of the award success, financial success, this would gross $623 million off a $150 million budget. The sixth highest grossing film of 2007, behind films we've mentioned today, such as Spider-Man 3, Pirates of the Caribbean, Transformers, Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, and I've forgotten one of the others above it. But a pretty stacked year in which Ratatouille did well. Always great to see. I know it's not about making money, but it's not. Maybe in this day and age, we celebrate original films as success more, and they seem to be fewer and far between in terms of audiences attending and studios backing them. That's a different conversation. But where I kind of go with this is over to yourselves. Before we get to our final thoughts, favorite scene from the film?
Go on, Sam.
Well, I mean, I love a good montage, and I think Pixar's really good at having that moment where things are happening, and they just show characters in quick succession with things. And I really like this one where it's like, okay, the restaurant's becoming a success, and the newspaper clippings are showing up, and Skinner's mad, and the people in the restaurant are happy. You see Remy working, they move into a new apartment. That to me is just kind of like pure joy. I really love that. I think, as I mentioned earlier, Remy, when he first appears in Paris, when he realizes where he is, I kind of love that moment of kind of, I've arrived. And to me, as I said before, that's where the film really gets going. And I love that. And I think, I think the final scene, I think just seeing the bistro work, and to me, it's kind of, I was so satisfied, and it did make me feel kind of a little bit teary, not as much as the next couple of films, but I mean, definitely it made me feel a certain sense of satisfaction, not only with the film, but just with the fact that these characters got to where they needed to be, and just really happy with how the film ended. So that even though it's kind of not got one overarching moment or scene that makes me go, oh my god, that is the one, but things like that I think really capture the essence of the film, which to me is a lot of joy.
That's fair. Craig?
I've got two. One's a main one, and one's like a little kicker, a chaser. The main one is, it's really Ego and the Ratatouille.
Yeah.
Him having it brought to him, and his, the sort of his kind of delight with it, and his kind of the flashback, and then him waiting to speak to the chef, until all of the other customers have gone. Just absolutely makes the film. I think it's excellent, actually, and that's the one scene that I always remember. If I'm thinking about this film, it's the first one that comes to my mind always as well. A small little one as my chaser is when when Remy is kind of scuttling through, where is he? He must be in some kind of like attic space, or like ceiling void or something, and he's like looking down into different rooms, and he goes past a room where there's a sort of a random couple where this woman is like pulling a pistol on her partner, and then within a second they're in each other's arms. I feel like it's just, aside from giving me a giggle, it's also just quite I don't know, it feels like it's somehow like a poetic commentary on like Paris itself, which feels kind of in keeping with the film, that there's this kind of intense violence and then kind of like intense lust right after, that I found pretty delightful. So yeah, those would be my favorite.
Yeah, I like that. Favorite for me, it's going to be the Ego scene at the end. Any scene of Ego is a cop out to say, but particularly the end monologue, as you said, it's what the film ends on. It's what you remember. It's the perfect speech at the right time to go out of that film with that high that comes with it. Smaller moments I mentioned earlier. I just love the boats. I love the concepts. The who where
Yeah.
the boats come from, the nets, the covering them up, how long were they there for, questions that don't need to be answered that I would love to know. And it's just those little moments. It's fun. It's what it can deliver with those fun moments. So that is there for me. And I also love the scene, it's not been spoken about, where Remy goes to run off from Linguini when he lets him out the jar, and he just sort of sympathizes with him / also realizes, well, I actually could be a chef if I stick with him. I like that moment where Linguini is just sort of not an idiot, he's not gullible, but you actually feel sorry for him and that he's done something nice. So there's some really nice moments, and kind of if that goes into my sort of final thoughts on this film, I do think this is a very good film. I think this is an outstanding animated film, and particularly the run Pixar are on, context of 2007, this being their 8th film as a studio. It's another incredible idea, something that is not only an original concept, but just the concept itself shouldn't work on film. But it does. They found a way to make it work. And whilst there's a couple of issues, as I said, more so the Skinner side of things, it doesn't take away, I think, from what the outcome is. But kind of said earlier, Craig, that they almost go the wrong way. And they could have. And that's the worry. This film could have been something else, but thankfully it wasn't. And I'm glad I got to revisit it in this series. It's probably the nice way of saying it. It's not my favorite Pixar film, but it's definitely one that's gone up in my estimations a decent amount.
Yeah, I think to go from, I think it's been difficult for me to kind of get in tune with these films, just because they feel they're in an era where I just so kind of disillusioned with that kind of thing. But it was nice to go back, and it's nice to have an appreciation for something where I probably could have had that same appreciation, or at least a different type of one, when it was originally released. The fact that it's 18 years ago, almost 19, is just feels mad. So I mean, it's just making me think about it. It's almost 20 years ago since I left, since I started high school, which is just insane. But no, I think it's a wonderful film. I think out of these up to this point, I think it's strong, but I think it would be towards the tail end. I think Cars is probably the weakest up to this point. But I mean, even that, I think I gave a 4 or a 4.5 out of 5 stars. Like this, I gave 4.5 out of 5 stars for. But I think it does just go to show the level of quality that these films have or had. We'll see as this series goes on about what people think. But, you know, I think Ratatouille will hold a special place in many people's hearts. And I can see why. For me, I think its main detriments are a part of the plotting and pacing. I think it kind of does get a little bit off 2/3 of the way into it before we get to the third act, but it sticks the landing. That, to me, that's the most important thing. If the conclusion was rubbish, it would really bring this down. But I think they pull it together, and I had a really great time watching it.
Yeah, I think I always remember this one fondly, and I would say it's kind of it's top tier Pixar, but not god tier Pixar for me. I've just done a quick tally. I don't think it's in my top 5, but it's probably number 6. You know, so it's no Monsters, Nemo, Inside Out, or Coco, or Toy Story 2 to flesh out my other ones, but it's definitely up there. Yeah, so yeah, good film. It goes a little bit wayward towards the beginning of the third act, but so many films do. Let's face it, and it definitely recovers it, and recovers it in a pretty spectacular fashion as well. So yeah, good recommend.
Definitely. And that is going to round out this review of Ratatouille, which has been amazing to do with you both. Very different. The first time. This is the great thing about the Pixar series is we haven't done animated stuff pre this channel being a thing. So these are all films at this point in time that no one's ever spoke about on the channel, which is nice to dive into them a little bit more. Something like Star Wars, as great as they are, before we've reviewed them, we spoke about them a million times. After we reviewed them, we still spoke about them a million times. So it's nice to go back in time to 2007, as depressing as that also sounds, of how far away that was too. But for anyone that's paying attention, it's curious. If you look at the screen now, you'll see the next 4 films as we enter, I say, a great run. I see Cars 2 on there. It's made it this week. We've got WALL-E, we've got Up, we've got Toy Story 3, and then there's Cars 2 coming the 10th of February. So there's a lot more Pixar to come. We're in episode 8 out of what will be 32 by the time Toy Story 5 comes out. It's the 40th anniversary of Pixar, as we've said this year too, which is going to be massive for Disney. But before I round out our sort of stuff, what are you guys both up to at the moment? Where can people find the podcast, and what is planned?
Oh, well, they can find the podcast Bond Again at Bond Again Pod on Instagram or any podcast platform if you're choosing. Bond Again is, I think we've done 7 episodes so far. I'm sure we have many more this year. It's I call it it's a James Bond podcast for born again Bond fans. Okay, like I think, as we discussed with this film, often you have a relationship to a franchise or type of film when you're younger. Then maybe you have a few sort of fallow years, and then you rekindle your love for it in a kind of unabashed way. And I think that's the journey that both myself and Sam had with James Bond. Each week we have news. Yes, we're always finding James Bond news. Even when you think there is none, we'll find it. So news, reviews, and also a bunch of nonsense as well. But it's really good fun. Sometimes we have some guests on. So we have to get you on, George, to come and talk to us about your relationship with James Bond. And so find us anywhere you like. We've always got something to talk about. So yeah.
Definitely, everybody, please follow them there. It's going to be a big year for Bond. I'm going to be the one that says it. By December this year, there will be a James Bond actor. I know people have said that every year for 4 years now. This year,
I think you could be right.
Will be.
I'm pretty confident. I'm feeling it. I think especially with the movement of First Light to May, I think there's a whole kind of build up now to an actor, a name of the film. Anything else is a bonus, but I think this year those two I feel like need to be locked in.
I'll tell you this, on the presumption that Dune Part 3 is moved to early November or late October because Avengers has the same release date and IMAX has to release both of them at IMAX exclusively. Fortunately, Dune has to move. Like how they announced a need to direct Bond the week before Dune started filming, I think the Bond actor will be official before the Dune press tour commences, just so he isn't asked for 6 weeks straight, who's playing James Bond? When do you film? I think we're going to have a release date, a filming date, and an actor by autumn. That's my outlandish James Bond prediction for this year. Maybe James Bond Day. That's still a thing. I'll be honest, guys. I don't know why it's a thing, but it's a thing.
Well.
Like, May the 4th is the day of days. Harry Potter Return to Hogwarts a bit cringy, but they get their own day. I'm sure I saw one of Marvel or DC tried to have their own day, which no one cares about. No, there's Batman Day. It's Batman Day. That's the one. That's not a thing. But yes, Bond's Day, October time. We will find out. It's going to be exciting. So everybody, please follow them both there. What are we up to on this channel? Well, the time is really going out. We should be entering awards season now. I'm scanning in my head what films are out. We have seen many of these films at the London Film Festival. So we may already have reviews up on the 2026 playlist. There should be a review out for Hamnet. And there should also be a review coming out for 28 Years Later, The Bone Temple this week. I say that so surprisingly. I realised that we're a week away from that film. And when this episode goes up, I might actually be in the cinema watching it on Tuesday. Do I book the double bill? That's the question. That is the $1 million question. But that is me rounding out. Everybody watching at home, thank you all so much for joining us. Both of yourselves for jumping on. It's been a pleasure to get you on. And everybody, thank you all so much for watching. Take care. We'll see you then.